I want you to try and visualize something with me for a second. We have all done this. You are at the grocery store, maybe you're in the cereal aisle, and you see two different families playing out two completely different scripts.
Oh, yeah. The classic observation game. We've all been there.
Right, exactly. So in one aisle, there is a parent who is just intensely managing every single move their child makes. They're directing traffic, correcting pronunciation, maybe hovering just a few inches away. It is intense. And then you look two aisles over and you see another parent who is barely even looking at their kid. Maybe they shout a command every 30 seconds, like put that down. Or conversely, they're just letting the kid run totally wild, totally unstructured.
And usually in that exact moment, we immediately jump to judgment, don't
Oh,
we?
100%.
We think, oh, that is just a helicopter parent. Or, wow, that dad has a really short fuse. We attribute it all to their personality,
Yeah.
to who they are as individuals.
Yeah, that's our default setting. We think parenting is this deeply personal expression of the self. But looking at the stack of research we're diving into today, I'm getting the sense that my snap judgments in the grocery store are completely missing the point.
We really tend to think we are the sole authors of our parenting style. But the research we have, and we're pulling from sociology, anthropology, and psychology for this deep dive, it suggests that a huge chunk of how we parent is scripted by things we cannot even see. In the field, researchers call these distal determinants.
Distal determinants, which I have to say sounds a bit like we were talking about map making or geography.
In a way, we actually are mapping the background. Distal just basically means situated away from the center. These are the background forces, the water we swim in, so to speak, that shape our values, our goals, and ultimately exactly how we treat our kids. And for this deep dive today, we are unpacking 3 of the biggest ones out there. We are looking at culture, socioeconomic status, and religion.
The big 3. So our mission today is effectively to unzip the psychology of the family home. We are going to look at why a parent in a high-rise apartment might parent differently than one in the suburbs, or why, say, a lawyer might discipline differently than a factory worker. And the real kicker for me is, it is not necessarily because they love their kids any differently.
Exactly. It is because the distal forces are pushing them toward completely different goals. We are going to see how your job title or your view on the nature of humanity might actually determine whether you put your kid in timeout or whether you use physical discipline.
Let's start with the widest lens possible then. The water we swim in, culture.
It is definitely the broadest determinant. But we really have to be careful how we define it here. It is not just, I live in France or I live in Japan. The research defines the cultural niche as having 3 specific interlocking components. You have the physical and social environment, you have the actual customs of child rearing, and then you have the parent psychology, so their beliefs and values.
So it is a triad. It is not just where you physically are, but who is around you and what you fundamentally believe. I really liked the comparison the research made to help visualize this. It asks you to compare a child raised in a Brazilian favela, a slum, versus a child on an American Indian reservation in Oklahoma versus a child in a wealthy suburb of Paris.
Right. Just think about the sheer physical reality there. If you are raising a child in a favela, the environment itself dictates certain parenting rules strictly for survival. The material products, what toys they have, what clothing, what media is available, it all completely changes the interaction.
Because the housing is crowded and resources are scarce.
Yes. So in that environment, a parent might prioritize keeping the child physically close, demanding strict obedience, just keeping them safe.
Whereas in the Paris suburb,
You have physical safety. You have an abundance of educational toys. You likely have parks and schools that are incredibly secure. So the parent actually has the luxury to focus on different things. They can prioritize academic achievement or negotiation or fostering independence because they are not worried about the child physically surviving the afternoon. The setting writes the script.
it effectively removes the luxury of choice in some of those tougher areas. But what really struck me in the reading was that this isn't just about rich versus poor or safe versus unsafe. There was that fascinating study from rural Cameroon mentioned in our sources.
Oh yes, that is a crucial study because it actually controls for the physical geography. The researchers didn't just compare Cameroon parents to American parents, which is what we usually see. They looked within the exact same rural region in Cameroon, but they compared parents based on their specific cultural and religious subgroups.
Right, so they looked at Muslims, Christians, and people adhering to indigenous African religions.
Exactly, so they are neighbors. They are literally living in the same physical environment, dealing with the same climate and resources,
But they are parenting differently.
drastically differently. The researchers found significant differences in their baseline values and child-rearing goals. For example, one group might place a massive emphasis on developing early motor skills, while another group focuses almost entirely on social connectedness and community integration.
Wow.
So even if you are next-door neighbors, if your cultural niche is different, if you're swimming in a different stream of values, your parenting is going to look completely different on the ground.
Which brings up something that I think is a massive blind spot for a lot of us, and definitely for me when I read mainstream parenting advice. We tend to think there's a correct way to parent, but really most of the time we're just talking about the Western way.
This is a huge, huge point in the literature. We call it the Western lens bias. We, and by we I mean Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic societies, we tend to view our specific methods as the universal human standard.
Like with attachment theory, this idea that you need this continuous sensitive care and contact, usually with one primary caregiver, to be a healthy human being.
Right, we treat that as a biological law of nature. If a mother isn't constantly available to the infant, our culture tends to label it insecure attachment. But in many other cultures around the world, that model makes absolutely no sense. Child rearing is shared among a huge network of relatives, siblings, and neighbors.
So the village really does raise the child.
Exactly. The rules of how to raise an infant are stamped early by the culture.
So what looks unusual or even cold to a Western eye, like a mother handing her baby off to a 6-year-old sibling for the entire afternoon, might actually be standard, highly effective practice in another cultural niche.
Precisely. And it works perfectly for that society. We're so often judging other parents based on a rule book they are not even playing by.
Okay, so culture sets the broad stage. It is the backdrop. But I want to zoom in a little bit to something that impacts us in a very tangible daily way. Socioeconomic status, or SES.
This is the determinant that arguably shapes the daily grind of parenting the most.
And we really need to clarify this for everyone listening, because when we say SES, most people just immediately hear money. But the research says it is much more complex than just your bank account.
It definitely is. SES is a mix. It is income, yes, but it is also education level and occupation specifically. Occupational prestige. It is about resources, power, and influence in society. And while it can feel arbitrary, like, why is a lawyer considered higher status than a master carpenter? Those labels have massive, measurable effects on how those people parent their kids.
One of the most consistent findings mentioned in the research is the discipline divide. And this is the one that you actually see play out in that grocery store scenario we started with.
It is. Statistically, and remember, we're talking averages here, not every single individual, but statistically, lower SES parents are more likely to use physical punishment or coercive discipline.
But do it because I said so approach.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas middle class or higher SES parents rely a lot more on reasoning. Let's talk about why we do not throw the cereal box, or frankly, they use guilt. Like, you're making mommy very sad when you do that.
Right. It is non-coercive, but it is heavy psychological pressure.
Yeah.
Now, the million-dollar question here is why? Why does your income and your job status change how you discipline a toddler? The research shows it is not just about financial stress.
This was my absolute favorite aha moment in the reading. It is Melvin Cohn's theory, and it basically says parents prepare their children for the world the parents live in.
Specifically, the world they work in. Sociologists call this the long arm of the job. Think about a blue-collar or lower SES job reality. Let's say you work on an assembly line or in a very strict service or retail role. What is actually valued there?
Well, if I am on an assembly line, I need to be punctual. I need to follow the safety protocols exactly. If I start getting creative or start asking the boss why we have to do it this way, I am probably going to hold up the line or just get fired.
Exactly. Obedience and conformity are the absolute keys to survival and success in that environment. You have to follow the rules to stay safe and to keep your paycheck. So completely unconsciously, you start to value obedience and conformity in your children.
You are training them for reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are training them to survive in the world you know. So do it because I said so isn't just a parent being harsh. It is a valid survival strategy for that social class.
That makes so much sense when you frame it that way. You are teaching them the rules of the game you are playing, and then if you flip it to the white-collar, high SES reality.
Right. Think about if you are a lawyer or an executive or working in marketing. Your job actively rewards initiative. It rewards self-direction and thinking outside the box. If you just follow the rules blindly without thinking, you might actually fail.
Mhm.
You need to be able to argue your point to a client or to a judge.
So those parents come home and they encourage their kids to negotiate. They say, why do you think you should have a cookie right now? Make your case.
Exactly that. They value autonomy because autonomy is what pays the bills in their professional world. So the flow is really clear. Socioeconomic status dictates your workplace values. Those workplace values dictate your child-rearing goals, and those goals dictate whether you spank or whether you negotiate.
It is not just personality, it is preparation. We have done culture, we have done class. Now I want to touch on the one that might be the most deeply personal for a lot of people. Religion.
It is massive.
Yeah.
Worldwide, something like 84% of people claim a religious affiliation. That is a huge driver of human behavior.
Mm.
And religion doesn't just impact your Sunday morning routine, it impacts how you view the very nature of a child.
The research pointed out some really interesting theological roots here, like literally asking the question, what is a baby? Is it a sinner or is it a saint?
Right. If you go back to the Puritan view, which was heavily influenced by St. Augustine, you have the idea of original sin. The child is born, tainted, or inherently willful. Selfishness is their default setting from birth.
So if you truly believe that, then your job as a parent is basically a spiritual rescue mission.
Literally. The parent's divine job is to break the will of the child in order to save their soul. You can see how that directly leads to a strict, authoritarian parenting style. In that framework, you aren't being mean when you are harsh. You are literally saving them from themselves.
Right.
Now, contrast that with the Confucian view, or the Islamic view, or even the secular view of Rousseau. They often view the child as inherently good, or at the very least a blank slate that just needs gentle nurturing.
So instead of breaking a will, you are gardening. You are just nurturing the goodness that is already planted there.
Exactly. And this theological difference plays out directly in the modern research on corporal punishment.
We definitely have to talk about the spanking data, because the research highlighted a very specific group here, conservative Protestants.
Yes, and we need to look at the data impartially here. Conservative Protestant parents report much more positive attitudes towards spanking, and they use it more frequently than other Christian denominations or non-religious parents. And they often explicitly cite the Bible for this, literal interpretations of Proverbs like, if you punish him with the rod, he will not die.
But, and here's where things get really interesting, usually we see broad data saying that spanking leads to bad outcomes, things like aggression, antisocial behavior, anxiety. But the research noted a real paradox with this specific group.
Yes, sociologists call this the conservative Protestant paradox. You would expect, based on general psychological research, that these high levels of spanking would lead to more behavior problems in those kids. But for children reared by conservative Protestants, the research shows they actually often have fewer behavior problems associated with spanking compared to other demographic groups.
That seems to completely contradict the standard developmental advice. Why is that happening?
Provided, and this is a very big provided in the data, that the spanking stops by the preschool years. The prevailing theory is that these parents combine this strict physical discipline with exceptionally high levels of warmth and daily involvement.
So it is the combination of the two. It is not just the strict discipline, it is the hug and the intense moral teaching that immediately follows it.
Exactly. It mimics what we call authoritative parenting, which is high expectations combined with high warmth. Religious parents, generally speaking across the board, are more involved. They are more affectionate, they provide more active supervision, and they focus heavily on the cohesion of the family unit.
So while they might value obedience and tradition over independence, which is a really big distinction from secular parenting trends, they're also statistically less likely to actually maltreat their children.
Right. There is a strong prevention aspect built into the religious community. It provides social support, a clear moral code, and a focus on the sanctity of the family that can actually buffer against severe neglect or abuse.
So we have these three massive forces. We have culture, SES, and religion, and they are all just swirling around us, basically handing us the script for how to be parents.
And they interact constantly, right? You might be a high-SES parent pushing for autonomy, but you are also a religious parent pushing for obedience. Parenting is essentially the act of navigating these crashing waves every single day.
It really makes you rethink the judgment we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive, that dad yelling in the grocery store. Maybe he is just stressed out, or maybe he is a working-class father unconsciously preparing his son for a world where stepping out of line has really severe real-world consequences.
And that mom who has her kid in 3 different weekend tutoring sessions. She is not just being intense for the fun of it. She is responding to the concerted cultivation norms of her specific social class. She's just trying to give her child the tools her community values most.
It is the distal becoming personal. The environment scripts the behavior.
It implies that we are not quite as original as we like to think we are. We are following scripts written by our environment long before we even realize it.
So, for everyone listening, for you out there taking all this in, what does this mean for us? Do we just accept the script we are handed?
I think the most powerful thing you can do with this research is turn the lens on yourself or on your own parents. Think about how you were raised. Were you a product of concerted cultivation or natural growth?
Did you experience the break the will style of discipline or the nurture the flower style?
And realizing that those weren't just random, arbitrary choices your parents made in a vacuum. They were likely direct responses to the economic and cultural reality they were surviving in at the time. I think it brings a lot of empathy.
Absolutely, it does. And it helps us be more intentional today. Once you can actually see the invisible strings pulling you, you can decide which ones you want to cut. You can choose which parts of that distal script you want to keep and which parts you want to completely rewrite for your own kids.
That is the ultimate goal. Awareness gives you a choice.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We spent some time talking about Leroux's concerted cultivation, that really high-intensity, high-achievement style that so many of us feel pressured into today. It definitely feels like the dominant cultural script right now.
Oh, the resume-building toddler.
Yeah.
It is everywhere.
Exactly. But we also talked about natural growth, the idea of letting kids just be, letting them play and hang out without an agenda, and the unique resilience and creativity that comes from that. So here's the question to think about. In a world that is increasingly obsessed with high achievement, optimization, and constant cultivation, are we regulating childhood entirely out of existence?
Are we losing the fine art of just hanging out?
Exactly. What happens to a generation that never learned how to just be bored? What might we be losing by not letting children just grow?
That is a question that is probably worth a deep dive all on its own.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Keep diving deep.